Right, we shall move on. Chris, over to you to give us some more information about DFID funding.
Okay, so and I think in terms of DFID funding, there are probably, in addition to the points I made earlier, there are probably a few general points to make and then some more specific ones. The first is a strong recognition that deciding what are the priority areas in health is an art, not a science, ultimately. And people who try and over-scientificize this get it wrong. And so we have some broad areas where we concentrate on because they're areas we think are clearly important and which we think others are not in, or we feel there's a great opportunity for forward movement. But we're not claiming that that's in any sense comprehensive. And no one of the funders here, including the Gates Foundation, would claim that. What we do try to do, however, is to provide multiple routes by which people can access our research funding, meaning that actually when someone comes up with an idea that we haven't come up with, they've come up with, they can access it by some routes. And I'll lay out some of them, although the list would be very long if I laid out the whole lot. And I think many people who have research funding in the UK aren't aware of the fact that the source of the funding was actually DFID, because we do it by one remove. So some examples. We have the Concordat with the MRC. That's where we give them money and they spend it for us. It's badged as MRC, but actually it's still DFID money. We put the money into the EDCGP, which was clinical trials in Europe. We put money alongside Gates into many of the product development partnerships. We do have the joint schemes with Wellcome MRC on clinical trials, and we hope in due course on Humanitarian and on health systems research. We have quite a number of standalone programs of our own, but we try to minimize the number of those, and the reason for that is straightforward. Even more than the Gates Foundation, the number of staff we have to distribute money is small. They're excellent, but there's very small numbers. The total number of people looking at all of DFID's research portfolio is smaller than Trevor's division. In health, it's less than a tenth. So what that tells you is that we do not have the capacity to handle multiple small grants ourselves and do it with a proper peer review system and all the rest of it, which is why we rely on partnerships with others who've got much more established things, because what we all accept is that most research happens with that actually advances the field, does not happen with huge blockbuster grants, it actually happens with lots of small things incrementally building up. On the other hand, we have a few areas which are our own particular areas of interest where we don't see other people operating, where we do put together consortia. We have competitions for consortia where we actually handle them primarily ourselves with external peer review and all the apparatus. But they have to be relatively large or we simply can't handle it. So that is the reason that we do things by multiple methods is partly to diversify our risk, because a lot of the stuff we're looking at is very expensive, partly to have the opportunity to provide our development experience alongside other people's, because we've got people in most of the major developing countries, but alongside people who've got real expertise in dividing things up, and partly because we want you to be able to, by one means or another, access DFID funding if you have areas that are really important for development. And I think if you can come up with an area which we should be covering and which there is no way you can cover by one of our current channels, we would be delighted to know that, because it's quite useful for us to be aware of the fact we've missed something. So, for example, just take an example of one of the questions that was asked, we've partnered with the Canadians on something called Saving Newborn Lives at Birth, and that alongside that there's a program called Saving Brains at Birth, which is specifically on the question about how best do we do things to minimise the mental health impact of the perinatal period and indeed earlier maternal insult. So I think that we accept that if the dozen excellent people in DFID looking at this try to design the perfect research program for development, we would fail. So the way to deal with that is to do these various different methods. I'm very happy to talk through in questions and answers some of the ways we do that. In terms of how we prioritise, we've broadly got three different ways in which we deliver research. One is looking at new technologies or ways of doing things, new to the world stuff. Our major way of doing that in the technology area is through the PDPs, Product Development Partnerships. And we try to prioritise those when what we see is that lack of a technology is the primary or one of the major blocks. So, for example, at the moment, our view on polio is we do not lack technologists of polio. All the problems in polio are to do with delivery and social science. Whereas if you look at, let's say, trypanosomiasis, we have Still, although DFID helped fund the first new drug for, I think it was something like 40 years, the last one having a mortality rate itself of 5%, the current drug is still far from perfect for multiple reasons, both operationally and in terms of safety profile, although it's a marked improvement. So, a trypanosomonas drug, a trypanosomonas diagnostic, is clearly a key part of the critical pathway to improving people in that area. So we try to look at the different areas that are of interest to us and work out along the multiple paths between having technology to do something and delivery at the far end, which are the ones which are causing the biggest blockage at this point in time. And sometimes we'll get it wrong, but at least we try and make the effort in terms of development. And we're very happy to be challenged if you feel we've got our balance wrong. The decision about whether to prioritise, let us say, and I think my final point would be, one of the things people often get very excitable about is where saying, why are you not prioritising this rather than that? There are a number of things where it is amenable to, if you make a decision, for example, that trypanosomonas is a disease that we're going to prioritise, that it is amenable to perfectly rational logic, which with some big caveats as to what are the major barriers in that pathway. We can sort of think it through and say there's a development problem, there's a diagnostic problem, there's an access problem, there's all these sorts of things. But the decision about whether we should prioritise neglected tropical diseases or maternal nutrition or hypertension in people, or let's say arsenic poisoning in Bangladeshi rice farmers, that is not actually amenable seriously to more than superficial rationality. Ultimately, you have to take a choice. And that is where politicians come in. Politicians in our area are the people who say, look, you've given me a range of things you can do. You've told me that these 8 are ridiculous ideas, but here's another 6 which are quite good. We've got money for only 3. My feeling is the way we should go is X. And that's actually, you can try and change the political debate, and that's the appropriate way to do that in the context of something like DFID. But it is perfectly reasonable to say some decisions are political. They're not technical. The technical is sort of downstream from that. It's the decision about now what do we do at a more operational level. So that would be my final point, I think.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We'll move on to Mark, if you'd like to give some more details of MRC's funding.
Thank you. So I thought I'd just start off by referring to the GFinder analysis of investment in global health research, just to put the UK position into some global perspective. This is the data compiled by Policy Cures, and it's been accumulated, I think, over the last 5 years. And interestingly, the 3 of us are consistently in the top 10 funders globally. No surprise that the top of the table is NIH and the Gates Foundation. European Commission and the aggregate of industry are also up in there. But I think that shows that the fact that we're all in the top 10 is actually quite impressive. MRC often feels that we're a fairly small funder in this field, but when you look at actually what is happening elsewhere, we're not one of the smallest by any means. And actually the UK, second only to the US. And if you look at Europe, the 3 funders here invest more in global health research than the rest of Europe, excluding the European Commission, put together. And I think that puts us into context, and I think that's a point I'd like to start from. And then go back to my humble position as an MRC, invest in global health research with a fairly modest budget of, as I say, around 50 million, which is it's not a ring-fence budget. It's one which is driven partly by, as I said, the extramural and intramural programs that we have. How do we set our strategy? Given that we're response mode, of course, it's difficult to set strategy. We can do it for our intramural programs, but we do have to try and shape the research that we do, even if it is response mode, even if it is being driven by you. And our previous chief executive, Leszek Borusewicz, set up some oversight groups, and we now have a global health group chaired by Peter Piot, director of the London School, to provide expert advice to MRC around our global health programs. In fact, Chris is one of the members of that august body, and it's that expert oversight of what we've been looking at that has helped us to shape a program and to put global health at the heart of MRC's research strategy. If you're familiar with our Research Changes Lives strategy, which is the whole of MRC's strategy, you'll notice that going global is one of 4 aims. We have 4 main overarching aims, and one of those is going global. And this year, Council reiterated that global health research is central to the work of MRC. And as we refresh that strategy and go forward, then we will see global health being retained as part of our funding and part of our investment. The mechanism for funding research is primarily through our research boards, but we do have a number of standalone programs, some of those in partnerships, and some of those through investments in other schemes or through specific initiatives. Chris mentioned the Concordat funding that comes to us, which we have failed perhaps to acknowledge some of DFID's contribution to that, to those grants, but particularly the funding through boards such as the Infections and Immunity Board. A lot of the work in global health research has actually been jointly funded with DFID. And the boards themselves set their own strategies. So recently the Infections and Immunity Board, for example, had a highlight notice for neglected tropical diseases because it was recognized that that was an area of our portfolio which was underrepresented, and we want to stimulate investment in that area. Again, we weren't ring-fencing budget because that tends to lead to making the wrong decisions about how much to invest and where to invest. But by highlighting areas, and we hope to encourage and stimulate more investment in those areas. One of the ways that we've been delivering our portfolio in infectious diseases, and particularly in clinical trials, has been investing in EDCGP alongside DFID. And we've been working now very closely with the other European countries and the European Commission to work on the second program of EDCGP. And although this is still subject to approval in Europe going through the process, I think it is probably now common knowledge, and I'll share that with you, that the program that we're developing is for a new 10-year phase of EDCGP with investment of 500 million from the member states matched by 500 million from the Commission. And the Commission has also announced that if we are able to secure additional funding from third parties, such as the Gates Foundation or the Wellcome Trust, or from other private industry, then they will also match that up to an additional 500 million. So there is potential for a €2 billion program that will be focusing on clinical trials for products against HIV, TB, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases. So additionally, this program will expand beyond the 3 diseases that have been focus of the first program and move towards neglected tropical diseases as well. And although the focus is on clinical trials, there is an expectation that that will extend beyond phase 3 funding to some phase 4 investment, particularly on health systems strengthening, where that particularly helps to implement the outcomes of the research that we have funded in the earlier stages of the program. And I think that, in a sense, reflects some of the thinking at MRC, that we have to not just fund the research that provides the evidence, but we have to work, particularly with other partners, particularly with DFID, to enable the research to be taken up, to be implemented, and to ensure that there is a mechanism or an opportunity to influence policymakers in ways that perhaps we can't do with our own mandate as a research council, because we have restrictions on how we can spend our money. So the work in partnership does help us to go beyond those borders. And EDCGP in particular has invested and will continue to invest in capacity building and building the platforms both for ethical review, for regulatory control, as well as infrastructure for the technology of doing clinical trials. On our own, we couldn't invest purely in capacity building outside our own units. An example where we have been able to again work in partnership with DFID is on our African Research Leadership Scheme. And this is a capacity building program, but we can do that because of the partnership. And this has been to try and encourage a partnership between research within the UK and in developing countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, where we are using the UK experience to mentor and encourage development of really outstanding individuals who have a great deal of potential, and to work within their host institution to develop the space within the institution to develop those research careers. And that's a program we've been running for the last couple of years. We're in the 3rd call now, and we've continuously shaped that program in response to the comments from applications, from applicants, and our own internal processes. And I think we're in a stage now where we have a 3rd call that we're hoping will establish itself as the mechanism that we will use in the future, so that people can start to identify individuals who may be suitable in the next couple of years and start thinking about how they could apply to us for funding in the future. Obviously, one of the problems in global health research is if you don't have sustainable mechanisms, then people, if we're changing the scheme every year, then you don't know how to plan. So I think that we have some responsibility to try and provide sustainability and consistent funding mechanisms. And that takes me back to the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases that I mentioned. I think one of the disappointments is that having got this program initiated, we've only so far had one call in hypertension. And if this is going to be a mechanism for NIH, the Canadian Institute of Health Research, Australia, New Zealand, New Zealand aren't members, India, Canada, ourselves, then we do need to come up with more programs. And if you've been following the work of GACD, you know that there's been a lot of work looking at mental health research and the opportunities there and the grand challenges in mental health research. And I think that that is certainly one area that we feel we do need to make some more investments in. But the challenge for doing mental health research is not to be taken lightly. And I would imagine that the first direction, as I said, for Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases is not going to be mental health, but perhaps other areas of chronic disease. I think that we will be seeing some investments in the next year, or some calls proposed in the next year. Other areas of collaboration, we collaborate with other research councils in areas such as emerging infections, particularly in influenza and pandemic preparedness. We've had calls with other councils on the ecology of emerging infections, and I think there's about to be a new call on zoonoses and infections. Perhaps ESRC colleagues will be able to help on some of those discussions later. And finally, we've referred today to a couple of the schemes that the three of us are involved in. I think we've had 3 years now of the Joint Global Health Trial Scheme, and we're hoping that that scheme is going to be extended for another 3 years, and all the funders at the moment are securing with our various bodies, going through the mechanisms to ensure that we have funding in place to have an extension of that for another 3 years. This time last year, we collaborated with ESRC on a workshop for health systems research, and we anticipated that coming out of that workshop would be a joint call for health systems research. And indeed, over the last year, we've been working together to try and, I suppose, pin down exactly what we want to see in that call and ensure that we can get the funding together. We're not in a position today to announce a call, but I think that we're prepared to say that we are still working and hope that in perhaps the beginning of next year, maybe the first quarter, we will be able to say more about how our thinking has been developed and what we're likely to be able to do. But I think that follows that trajectory of having, in particular, invested in research that provides evidence, the need to take that evidence forward. And health systems research seems to be an area where it is particularly timely to work. Increasingly, we're seeing the need to take that research forward. And I think it's something that MRC and DFID has been talking about for many years, and now we've got the opportunity to actually do that together. So I think that we've got a combination of response mode funding, policy-driven research, and of course intramural programs that I think is actually quite an important program in global health research. We don't have the large-scale opportunities that perhaps you have in the US. We don't drive programs too much because I think it's important it's driven by the researchers. But as I said at the start, with the GFID results, I think that we are one of the organisations that is able to make an impact in this area.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Finally, Jimmy Whitworth.
Thank you. So the Wellcome Trust, much like MRC, works largely in response mode. So the researcher community knows that they can approach us and pitch ideas and potential projects to us, and that we're happy to have a dialogue with them about whether that's something that might be suitable for coming in for consideration for funding. And I think the rationale for that largely is that we think that the best ideas are actually out there, and that the best ideas aren't actually generated from within here. We quite often will look for seeing a preliminary application that we can share around and give some judgment and some guidance on that. and if we ask for full application, then it's going to take probably from the start of the process to the end, somewhere between 6 and 9 months, I would say, for us to make a definitive decision on proposals that come in. Now, we have budgets, so we have to make choices. Within global health, we spend somewhere between 70 to 100 million pounds per year on global health, and that will be driven by the quality of the science in competition between the applications that come in. So that is where that response mode is perhaps the main area where we give out our funding. But we do have a number of other targeted initiatives, some of which have been mentioned already. One I'd like to mention is around capacity building, and we're funding at the moment 13 grants in Africa and 1 in India, and some of this work is being done in partnership with DFID. Now, when I talk about capacity building, this is not simply training programs. We feel that capacity building, there are 3 main elements to this. Some of it is about training individuals, but those individuals need to be within strong, vibrant, well-equipped institutions that are able to support and host them, and those institutions themselves need to be embedded within national, regional, supportive systems which value science and scientists and are interested in credible research careers for those scientists. The amount of effort you need to put into any of those 3 components for capacity building is going to differ depending on the context, the circumstances, and the countries in which you're working. But capacity building is more than just training in our eyes. You've heard mention of the joint initiative on clinical trials for global health. We are currently seeking funding for another 3 years of this scheme, which up till now we think that the quality and quantity of the applications that have been coming in have been very good. It's too early to judge the success of any of the trials that we've funded in that, but certainly on the size of the applications, these look fine. Together with NIH, we've funded a new initiative called H3 Africa. This is human hereditary and health in Africa, and what we're hoping to do here really is to align genomics with epidemiology within the African context, and focusing on non-communicable and communicable diseases to bring some modern techniques to epidemiological population-based research within Africa. We have a new initiative on humanitarian disasters. Chris mentioned this in partnership. This is going to be, again, a partnership between DFID and the Trust, and Save the Children Fund are also going to be an implementing partner within this, and there will be a call in this area coming out next year. Health systems, you've heard how we're developing a call in that area. Again, that will be a partnership approach that we will take there. One thing we are doing on our own is a new pump priming scheme on connecting the environment, nutrition and health. And again, there should be an announcement early next year about opportunities in that area. We also, within the Trust, have expanded some of our opportunities for public health, and one of our panels on society and health is expanding its remit and will be taking on more of the societal determinants of health and also some more of the qualitative work within public health. So a number of new initiatives coming up there, targeted, which I think are all relevant to international development there. To do this, we do need to expand our team a bit, and we've recently recruited 2 new members of the team who are probably known to some of you here. Dermot Maher and Jane Kengea Kayondo have both joined our team recently. And I think the future is bright for going into 2013 with these expanded initiatives and a bigger team.
Thanks very much to all our panellists there.